All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helmi Handoko. I am the Business Development Manager at HHP Law Firm, a member of Baker McKenzie. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar on Indonesia Leading Edge Omnibus Law series on recent development in trade sector. We have a very exciting event that we have prepared for you today with some guest speakers from Bank Mandiri. We have Mr. Andri Asmoro. We have Mr. Brian Chan from Hong Kong Trade Development Council. And also we have speakers from HHP Law Firm. We have Mr. Riza Buditomo and Mr. Audi Ferdiananda, both from the tax and trade practice groups of HHP Law Firm. In today's session, we will cover key updates on the following. We will discuss on macro environment on trade, which will be delivered by Mr. Andri Asmoro. And then we will have the Hong Kong Trade Development Council's facility on trade promotions. Mr. Riza and Mr. Audi will be speaking on key updates on the implementing regulations on trade activities, recent custom highlights and policy under the Omnibus Law, and also overview of RCEP. Before we begin, we would like to go over a few housekeeping notes. So this session will be recorded, and some of the slides of today's webinar will be provided in a follow-up communication to you. Please also use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any point of today's session. And we will be addressing these at the end of the presentations, and we will do our best to get to all of them. Lastly, similar to most of you, we are all working and presenting from our homes. Thus, we attempt to create a studio-like atmosphere for this session. So please forgive the occasional background noise. And now I am pleased to introduce Ibu Rinita Ekasari as the Director of External Affairs and Public Relations of Inacham, who will officially welcome everyone who joined the session today. Bu Rinita, over to you.
Thank you, Pak Helmi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, our key speakers, distinguished guests, and honorary members. Selamat sore. My name is Rinita. I'm one of the board directors of Indonesian Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. I would like to officially welcome you to this event. Thank you for joining us. Today's topic is about Omnibus Law, specifically to the recent development in trade sector. This is our second joint event with the support of Indonesian Chamber of Commerce in China, Hong Kong, Macau, HKTDC, Indonesia Hong Kong Business Association, Baker McKenzie, and of course, Bank Mandiri. Often we were asked on Indonesia Omnibus Law, especially for the trade sector. The questions raised about why the law was generated, what is the impact to the business or even to the general trade, how effective is the implementation, who are the stakeholders, and so on and so forth. Despite the uncertainties due to the pandemic and also geopolitical situations, indeed, this new law brings another concern and questionable impact. We understand your concern. Here, through this event, we gather the specialists who understand Indonesian business climate and legal system, very important, who will give you the insight how Omnibus Law would actually bring some benefits to you and your business. Again, as part of our big objective from Inacham, we try to bridge you to the right stakeholders, as well as we become a conduit of knowledge sharing on the specific topic. Last but not least, on this event, I would like to invite you to check our website, drop us an email, and become our member. We are committed to continuously bring more benefits to you and your business. Thanks again. Hope you enjoyed this event. I hand it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Rinita. And now I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Andri Asmoro, Chief Economist from Bank Mandiri, who will kick us off with the macro trade outlook. Pak Andri, over to you.
Thank you, Pak Helmi. Can I get my presentation? Can you share it? All right. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for the opportunity for Bank Mandiri to share about the updates on Indonesia trade potentials and current policies. Indonesia trade performance in 2021 is expected to accelerate further on the back of recovery on commodity-related sectors. I will start the presentation with the update of the global recovery story and Indonesia's current performance. So the global economy has recovered from the rock bottom level last year. If we put two main indicators for the global economy, PMI performance and global export performance, they both were posted with the continuous upward directions. As presented in the left-hand chart, most countries have reached PMI which above the threshold level of 50. It indicates the expansion in the manufacturing sectors have already been started at least the second half last year. Three PMI in major Indonesia's export destination, China, Japan, and the US were posted with way above the threshold lines. So if you can see the chart here. As a result of the trade performance was followed with a north-headed trajectory. India and Indonesia were significantly improving from the rock bottom level, while China could manage as one of the major drivers in the trade recovery. China was not relatively affected compared to other countries in terms of export of growth. Next slide, please. As a result of improvement of Indonesia's major trade partners, the commodity prices were also positively affected. They were recovered from the deep contraction in the first half of 2020. Currently, global commodity prices continue to hike, supporting Indonesia's export performance. February 21 export value records $15.27 billion, up by 8.6% year on year. The annual increase is mostly due to relatively higher global commodity prices as export volume is reported to shrink. Export of agriculture sector rises by 3.16% year on year, of manufacturing sector of 9% year on year, of mining sector by 7.5% year on year. Values of top three non-oil and gas export commodity mostly increase. Mineral fuels also hiked by 4.9% and 24% month-on-month correspondingly. Next slide, please. We believe that Indonesia's top three commodity prices like coal, CPO, and rubber will be relatively improving compared to last year. Overall, our projection is that the 2021 average commodity prices will be much higher, but will not boost another cycle of commodity boom due to limited demand post short-term overshoot. As you can see from the table, for example, average coal prices will stay at around $74 per ton this year, and $78 per ton next year, while the CPO prices will stay at around $720 per ton this year and flat to next year. The improvement should be positive for Indonesia trade performance this year. Next slide. As you can see in the chart, other than from commodity related sector, the positive figure also comes from an increased capital good performance. Capital good imports suggest improved domestic investment activities amid Indonesia's economic recovery progress. In February 2021, import value is $13.26 billion, growing by around 14% year on year, or marginally contracting by minus 0.5% month on month, as productive import goods are recorded to rise. Indonesia's trade surplus is reported slightly higher in February 21, but remains relatively lower compared to last year's monthly trade surplus series since May 20. February 21, trade balance, of course, will books around 2 billion surplus, the 10th straight months of surplus. We remain expecting the current deficit to manageably widen to 2021, because the improvement of the imports, because of the productive imports, This is mostly due to the improvement of the domestic demand amid the economic recovery boosted by smooth COVID-19 vaccination program and economic reform acceleration through the Omnibus Law enforcement. Albeit widening, it remains narrower than the pre-pandemic 5-year average level of minus 2.2% of the GDP. I can give you an illustration where back in 2013, when we have like a taper tantrum era, our current account deficit touched minus 3.18%. This year, we expect that the current account deficit will touch only minus 1.9%, relatively below a manageable or relatively below a balanced current account deficit at around minus 2.4%. In the second half 21, assuming that the restriction on commodity activities have been relaxed due to declining daily COVID-19 cases and the increasing people receiving this vaccine, import is projected to catch up as the economic growth accelerates, driven by the strengthening domestic consumption and considerably increasing fixed capital investment activity. Those input goods account for a huge chunk of import, or around 90% of total imports. Moreover, the COVID-19 vaccine procurement will also contribute to higher import in 2021, specifically starting in the second Q 2021. Now I will continue with the characteristic of Indonesia export and import pattern. Next slide, please. Next slide, yes. From the export breakdown, Indonesia remain relying on commodity sector and natural resources products. However, recent policies that are open to investment may change trade potentials. Commodity-related export, including palm oil, coal, rubber, and oil and gas, contribute around 25% of total export. Another source of export driver is coming from travel and tourism, which contribute around 7%. This is in line with the current government's initiative to support the tourism sector in the midst of current COVID-19 crisis. Next slide. On the other hand, Indonesia is also imports almost 13% on petroleum, oil and gas, oils and its products, while imports on services are dominated by transport, mostly related to logistics sectors and travels. The share of the imports was around 6% or around $12.4 billion. Other than that, Indonesia's import mostly coming from the raw materials like machinery and food-related imports. This represents the figure that Indonesia's domestic manufacturing industries are heavily rely on the imported raw materials. The government has initiated several programs to support the domestic sufficiency in raw materials for domestic producers. Next slide, please. From the manufacturing industries, the shares of export from these sectors remain small, even though manufacturing has some potential to grow. Some Indonesia's manufacturing exporting products, including motor cars and other motor vehicles, footwears, allocated paper and paperboard, and articles of jewelry, these manufacturing exports have a compounded annual growth rate at around 10 to 40% in the last 18 years before COVID hit the global economy. This year and in the future, the strategy to boost manufacturing industry products export will be the main strategy for Indonesia. It is, of course, to dampen the dependency of Indonesia's economy to from the commodity-related products. Hence, the government will improve the competitiveness through several reforms for investment and business players. Next slide, please. From the import sides, top imports are dominated by petroleum and machinery. Imports on chemical and chemical products such as ethylene and propylene are also substantial. Most of the imports are, as I mentioned earlier, are for the raw materials for exported products or domestic usage. Most industries that regularly import the raw materials are pharmaceuticals, FMCG, especially toiletries and electronic related. Next slide. Currently, the top 5 contributors for Indonesia's export are vegetable fats, mineral fuels, iron and steel, electrical machinery, and rubber. those 5 products contribute around 46% of total exports. On the other hand, top 5 raw materials import contributed around 41% of total imports. So we can see from here that actually Indonesia imported regular products every year. Nothing new every year. We import the same similar products since 20 years ago. So there is no significant differences. Thus, we can guess that without any improvement in competitiveness in manufacturing industries, it is quite tough to break the pattern. Next slide, please. In terms of export destination, export to China becomes the major source of Indonesia's ups and down export performance with its 21% contribution. Export to China was mostly coming commodity-related export as the main source of energy in China. Furthermore, export to the US comes in the second place with its 12% contribution. Most commodities that were exported to the US, like garment, footwear, and the derivatives of textile products. China also became the major source of Indonesia's import. So you can see here, China's contribution at around 35.2%. Yeah, followed by Japan around 7.4% and South Korea 5.96% or around 6%. So this is also similar to the what Indonesia have already imported. So the pattern is not relatively new. So in the last 20 years, or even if we can extend it to the last 30 years, for example, the pattern of the country of origin is still similar. So in the next, for example, 5, 10, or 20 years, we can see that the major contributors of Indonesia's imports will be coming from these countries. Next slide, please. All right. Now I will begin with the next big thing for Indonesia's trade opportunity. So in 2021, there is an opportunity for Indonesia to boost export performance through the RCEP. So the RCEP is the next big thing to drive export and investment. RCEP is predicted to be the world's biggest free trade bloc in terms of the number of countries involving in and the trade investment values. It covers around 27% of global trade and around 30% of global foreign direct investment. Also around 30% of global population and gross world product. In the 10th month of 2020, Indonesia's export to all partnerships members recorded around 53.6% of total exports, while import from the partnership members accounted around 66.3% of total imports. When it is true that the economic competition will be more intensive in the region, but not joining RCEP will result more disadvantages for Indonesia. Therefore, to be able to win the competition and avoid ending up as just the market, Indonesia needs to accelerate its structural transformation, including to shift the current main export commodities, which mostly are natural resources, to be more value-added manufactured commodities. From the right chart, everyone, you can see that we can learn from the previous free trade agreement, so that Indonesia needs to optimize the benefit by joining the FTA or the trade liberalization initiative. For example, Indonesia intra-trade share in the ASEAN-China free trade agreement only relatively stay at around 8%. So you can see in the right-hand side, yeah, Indonesia's contribution in 2013 stay at around 8%, while Malaysia's and Thailand's shares at around 11 to 12%. Vietnam in 2013, the contribution only around 4% for the export share in China-ASEAN free trade agreement. But in 2019, right before the pandemic, Indonesia's share to the China-ASEAN free trade agreement dropped to 7%, while Vietnam from 4% now improved to 6.8%. I think now if we take only the number in 2020, the number for Vietnam, I think it will be improving. Next slide, please. So to complement RCEP, Omnibus Law will play a key role in attracting FDI from those three countries. So the law needs to make sure any economic activity resulting from it will be in line with the mid and long-term agenda and goals. So as you can see in the right-hand side, the RCEP opens some market access for Indonesia's products, such as agriculture, to China, for example, automotive, fisheries, food and beverages products. So actually, RCEP opens so many opportunity for Indonesia to expand the market. So if we take a look on the calculation from the government, for example, Indonesia has a chance to increase both export and FDI inflow from the partnership members by 8 to 11% and 18 to 22% respectively. In 2021 to 2023, for example, Indonesia has a potential to expand its economic growth by 0.05% percentage point, or on the contrary, if Indonesia leaving RCEP, may decelerate the growth by minus 0.07 percentage point. Next slide. As the last part of my presentation, I will share updates regarding the government initiative in support the investment and trade. Indonesia has taken a strong step to reform the economy with the Job Creation Law or Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja. By March 2021, the government has launched up to 50 implementing regulations related to the law. So key issues in the law include: one, removing the restriction. You can see from the left side. So removing the restriction and condition on FDI. Number two, centralizing and streamlining business licensing and land acquisition procedure. Number three, adopting a risk-based approach to business licensing. And number four, reforming labor market. The law is expecting to address structural problems which make Indonesia losing its competitiveness in international markets. Implementing regulation of Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja or Job Creation Law may have impacts on Indonesia trade and competitiveness. There are 4 government implementing regulations that have a specific benefit for investors. The first one is government regulation number 28, like in the left side, 28 2021 on organization of industrial sector. The implementing regulation discuss about the supports for acquiring raw materials and components for industries, strategic industries, and monitoring the management on industrial zones. The second one is the government regulation number 29 on trade on organization of trade sectors. It consists of policies and management of exports and imports, distributions, and also export development. And the number 3, the government regulation number 40, which includes the special economic zones. So I think this is the one that everyone is needed, because now we can see which area or which regions that really specialize on that sector. So it consists of economic sector in special economic zones, special economic zones approval, licensing, and incentive and supports in special economic zones or SEZs. Indonesia has strong comparative advantage on export on tourism-based services. New government regulation also support the environment. For example, foreigners are allowed to own property in tourism-based special economic zones. So I think this is the room for improvement in investments, and also it will also boost the export later on. So number 4 is the government regulation number 41 on free trade zones and ports. So there are 2 things: the special economic zones and also the trade zones. So the government regulations number 41 consists of free trade zone authority, licensing, limitation, and also fiscal incentive. So if you are, for example, want to invest in Indonesia, and then you join in the industrial estate, you will gain some or several fiscal incentive from it. Next slide. So I will go into detail into each of the implementing regulations. So to be specific, there are 2 points. Number 1, from the government regulation number 28. So number 1 is the availability of the raw materials and components. So government has already got the has already commit in supporting industries to get necessary raw materials and components. The government will use, for example, export restriction. Number 2, the ease of imports to ensure the supply of raw materials and components. Now, what's the implication to trade? So the implication to trade, based on our analysis, is that policies on import decisions are now centralized at coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs and no longer at technical ministries. And number 2, the trade policies are more coherent. So this is the positive one. And the government can maintain market stability on raw materials and components. It also ensures the supply of raw materials. Number 3, the government also could collect information on raw material usage. And number 4 and number 5, the companies are not allowed to resell imported raw materials in domestic market except in certain circumstances. So if you import, for example, for the raw materials, you have to use it for the export-oriented sectors. So strict implementation on commodity balance will raise excessive monitoring and create barriers for trade. I think this is the risk of the changes here. Next slide. So the next slide is that about the government regulation number 29. So government regulation number 29 is basically about the organization of trade sector. I think I will skip this one. Yeah, I will continue with the next slide. Yeah. Yes, the next slide is about the government regulations. Yeah, number 40. Yeah. Wait. Before 41, can you back to number 40? All right then. Yeah. All right. So this is the special economic zone and government regulation number 41 on the free trade zones. So what's the implications to trades from the government regulation? Number one is how the government regulation is to improve the investment certainty. So hopefully right now, because it is centralized in the central government, especially in the coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs, so it will be it could boost the investment of certainty. Of course, several questions will be on how to harmonize the regulations between the central government and also the local government. That always be the barrier for the investment or the investors coming into Indonesia. Right now, I think the central government, especially for the coordinating Minister and Economic Affairs, and also the chairman of the coordinating investment board in Indonesia will take a lead on this initiative. Number 2, foreign ownership is allowed at higher than national level on certain sectors on SEZs. Trade facilitators and incentive would make SEZs and FTZs are more attractive. I think that's the basic one. I think the one that really interesting is that number 5, tourism-based SEZ will increase Indonesia's export in tourism. This is the one that actually government want to boost right now with for example, with the new 10 Bali's destination or tourism destination, like the new Bali. Next slide, please. So this is actually the map of the special economic zones, throughout the countries. So at the beginning of the implementation of Omnibus Law, there are several business opportunities in the regions. Investors can optimize their interest rate by knowing the special economic zones in each region in Indonesia. For example, if you are interested in tourism sectors, Bali and Nusa Tenggara, and the other 10 tourism destination, or we call it the new Bali, for example, is where you have to go. Central and local government will give some incentive from this. Next slide. As mandated by the Omnibus Law, the industrial competitiveness is also boosted through several incentives through industrial estates in many places in Indonesia. For example, Batang Industrial Estate is one of the hot industrial estate in Indonesia currently, which investor can get some incentive through tax cuts and integrated logistics infrastructures. So if you want to know the Batang is in Central Java. So Central Java basically right now have a much lower, for example, labor cost compared to the West Java. So now government try to improve the competitiveness by giving or centralize the industrial and giving the tax incentive on it. Next slide. So this is actually my last slide. Last but not least, the reform is also expected to rejuvenate exports on labor-intensive sectors. At the same time, relaxing investment is expected to improve high-tech industries such as electronics and cars. The government has laid out plans to develop downstream industries, particularly in mining sectors. Indeed, Indonesia has some success stories in developing downstream industries. So my last statement will be, of course, there are lots of things that the government of Indonesia must do to boost export and investment for performance. But the significant reform that have been issued since last year indicated that Indonesia is heading toward the right direction. So I will stop my presentation here. Have a nice day, and thank you all for the attention.
Okay, thank you, Pak Andri. I believe there's 2 questions in the Q&A box that you might want to attend later on. With that being said, I will go to the next presenter, which is Mr. Brian Chan, who will be presenting on his material. Mr. Brian?
Thank you, Pak Helmi. Bapak Ibu sekalian, selamat sore. Saya Brian. I will use English in my presentation. So as Pak Andri mentioned, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, signed in November last year, has given us a great opportunities on more business and deals making. It is one of the largest trade deals in history, covering a third of the global economy and population. The 10 ASEAN countries, also Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea are in this partnership. For HKTDC, we see that it is a golden opportunity for more business and investment. And in my presentation, I will let you know, firstly, what is an organization that we call the HKTDC, what are the roles that we can play, what are the advantages of Hong Kong to line up business between Indonesia and also every parts in the world. And lastly, I will let you know what are our platforms or vehicles to facilitate the trade. Yeah, next please. So for HKTDC Hong Kong Trade Development Council, it established in 1966, so more than 50 years of history. Statutory body in Hong Kong means we receive subvention from the Hong Kong SAR government every year, but a majority of income, we earn it by organizing our own trade events in Hong Kong. With that revenue, we use all to promote trade by promoting Hong Kong as a two-way investment and business platform. We have an extensive network. We have 50 offices worldwide. Next slide, please. So yeah. You can see that all the economic hub, we have set up office already. For Jakarta office, we have been here for almost 8 years. Within these 50 offices, 13 are in China. So with our headquarters in Hong Kong, how the Jakarta team can facilitate more trade and business is that we work with our headquarters and also our overseas offices to bring in suppliers, buyers, and investors into Indonesia. Next, please. So for Hong Kong, I believe most of you know we are an international financial center. We are a logistic hub, and also we are the place where the culture is Midwest and many competitive advantages that you may already know, as some of you are from Hong Kong and China. But I would like to present you with some new initiative that we see is another golden opportunity to match with the partnership RCEP that I mentioned at the very beginning. It is the Greater Bay Area. The full name should be Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area. It consists of 9 cities in Guangdong province of China, which you can see here, and also adding Hong Kong and Macau as a arts. Next, please. So it targets to be another Bay Area that can be have similar achievement with what the Tokyo or San Francisco or New York has achieved. To support this kind of business, our infrastructure are also ready in Hong Kong. The first one you can see here is the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. It already in operation since 2018. Next, please. So it is actually a magnificent architectural structure that it facilitates more logistics, not only for goods and merchandise, but also tourists and people. The next one I would like to introduce is the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong high-speed rail. It shortened the distance between the travel from Hong Kong to the 2 first-tier city in Guangdong province, the Shenzhen, which is the innovation hub in China, and Guangzhou, which is the capital in Guangdong province. Next, please. So you can see that actually the Chinese central government, as well as Hong Kong SAR government, has invested a lot to improve the infrastructure of Hong Kong to be better connected to the cities in Guangdong province, to have a greater merge with financial and economic and trading activities. So for TDC, as mentioned, we have extensive network. So what we are going to do is to establish even more mature and all-rounded trading platforms for suppliers to meet buyers, and also for investors to meet project owners. The first one that I would like to introduce to you is the Belt and Road Summit, which is, as you can know from the name, to promote the Belt and Road initiative. What we do is not only by a plenary session that you can listen to the latest policies and cooperation between countries along the Belt and Road initiative, but also we organize a deal-making session that project owners of infrastructure projects can meet investors from all around the world. Before the event, we have dedicated teams to organize business matching meetings so that the audience coming from all around the world are not just listening to the seminar or plenary, but actually they are expecting someone important to meet up to speed up the projects that are in their hand. So as you can see in this slide, we invite senior government officials, representative of international institutions such as ADB or AIIB, and also business leaders to exchange views on multilateral collaborations, and also mainly on the Belt and Road initiative. Next slide, please. Last year, we were very honored to have invited the President Jokowi to make a keynote speech on our online session of Belt and Road Summit. And also our Vice Minister of Trade, Dr. Jerry Sambuaga, was in our policy dialogue with some other countries along the Belt and Road initiative. Other than this plenary session, we also have online roundtable meeting to feature the investment opportunity in Kalimantan, because as all of you may already know already, there is a plan to move the new capital to Kalimantan. So we have investors group from in our context that are very interested to invest in this master plan. So we line up project owners from Kalimantan and also investors from China and Hong Kong to sit down and have an online meeting. We will continue to do more networking session or online meetings in this way to facilitate trading and deals so that everyone can be well prepared. Once the travel resume, we will organize trading delegation to come to visit Indonesia, especially the projects that we already have in hand, and also to facilitate more trade business. Next, please. So back to the Belt and Road Summit, actually, we have 5 key focuses, as you can see here in the circle. Not only the policy coordination, but also facility connectivity, trade and investment, financial integration, and cultural exchange. So I would cordially invite all of you to join our session for the Belt and Road Summit. Should be in September this year, but we don't know whether we are able to do a physical session yet. Hopefully we can. But anyway, you're most welcome to join us no matter you can come to Hong Kong or you can join the online session. Next, please. Another platform that we will facilitate trade and investment is brand new for this year. We call the Asia Summit on Global Health. And as we all of us know, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought not only huge disruptions to business worldwide, but also underlined the need of concerted efforts in strengthening and innovating the global health landscape for a resilient and sustainable future. Next, please. So, positioned as in Asia's premier international conference on health, innovation, and investment, this summit will bring together senior government officials and policymakers, investors, influential business leaders, financial and professional service providers, as well as renowned researchers and academics from all around the world to exchange insights on global health, innovation, and investment trends. Actually, quite similar to the Belt and Road Summit, that the same session we will do is to line up project owners from Indonesia with investors from all over the world. Just that for Belt and Road Summit, it's more on infrastructure, while for this Asia Summit on global health is on the healthcare and health-related investment projects. So next, please. So you can see what are the elements that we are going to include in the full-day program. And with the Omnibus Law, we foresee and expect that more investors and service providers in this sector will come into Indonesia. And then we are very happy and ready to facilitate the investment and also the establishment in this session. More conveniently, or a majority of them will probably form joint venture. So this is also what we target to line up during this Asia Summit on Global Health to facilitate more investment on this topic, as well as to bring more advanced and better medical services to Indonesia. Next, please. So for sure, there are lots of reasons for you, no matter you are the investors or the project owners or someone who are very interested to know more latest market intelligence on this topic. Next, please. And next, please. So you can see actually we have quite a broad audience profile that we are targeting. This is the third session, and we expect it to be very having a great impact, not only in the business community, but also the medical and healthcare sector. So more information will be available in the second half, in the later part of this year. And you're most welcome to contact me or my team if you're interested. Lastly, about this part is how we target this event on health topic to be comparable to. Next, please. Yeah, this one. The Asian Financial Forum. I guess some of you may already know. Every January, we invite the most prestigious speaker and also, again, project owners and investors to come to Hong Kong and not only listen to the latest market information, but also to speed up their business and deal making. You can see the list of the top-notch speaker that we have had. So yeah, this is the second part, that how we build up platform to facilitate trade and investment. And next, please. The last part, we'll come back to our traditional platforms or vehicles, how we facilitate merchandise trade and the services trading. So you can see here, there are four main pillars of CDC business. First one is trade fair, and then we have our product magazines, and also our online portal, which you can make business deals online with that trade portal. And during this difficult time, we have invested another quite a big amount in upgrading this system so that our suppliers will find it more easier to talk to and connect to new buyers. And the last part is our mobile applications. I will go through this very quickly because I guess most of you would be quite familiar with what we are doing as our main business. So in normal days, we organize more than 30 international trade fairs in Hong Kong. Some of them, I would say more than 10, are the largest marketplace of their kind in Asia, such as electronics, jewelry, gift, watches and clocks, lighting, etc. So we keep it continue even in the pandemic. We do online trade fairs in last year and also this year. Next, please. One example is the autumn sourcing week that we did in November last year. Next, please. You can see that we even resemble the environment of the Wan Chai Convention Center in Hong Kong that you may have been to. We line up our suppliers, talking about more than 1,000 from not only China and Hong Kong, but all over the world with our buyers. And just like the deal-making session that I mentioned for our Light Band Road Summit or the Asian Summit on Global Health, we have a dedicated team to line up meetings for both suppliers and buyers well before the event. So they not only go into this online platform to see what are the suppliers on the list or what are the buyers here, but they are expecting a day of meetings that our colleagues and our team have lined up for them during these 7 days or even 2 weeks of trade fair online. Next, please. And then the other part is our online portal. It may sound a bit similar, but actually it's different because this online portal is a year-round platform that you can make business. Next, please. As we have 50 years of history in facilitate trade, so we have quite a strong database in buyers and suppliers all over the world. We have another big team to keep our data updated every year. So next, please. Here are some figures. We have more than 130 quality suppliers that we have been in contact with our 50 offices all over the world. And at the same time, we have more than 2 million buyers that are interested to look for the merchandise that our suppliers can supply. So for all these activities, even in the pandemic situation, our team even more busier actually, because we spend our efforts and time in lining up business meetings online. So next, please. And with the big investment I mentioned that we made on the trading platform, suppliers can have even more options and vehicles to upgrade their page, so that would be more attractive to buyers, and also pave way in the long run that, okay, after the pandemic, the sourcing habit that buyers may have may change for good. So the merchandise, the suppliers can be more ready to the online environment to facilitate more trade. So quite a lot of platforms and business that we are eager to facilitate. So no matter you are investors, suppliers, or project owners from Indonesia or Hong Kong, China, just let us know, see how we can facilitate your business plan. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you, everyone. And I'll give it back to Helmi.
Thank you, Mr. Brian, for your presentation. And next we will go to the presentation from Mr. Riza Buditomo and Mr. Audi Ferdiananda from HHP Law Firm, who will discuss on the recent development in trade sector. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Mr. Riza and Mr. Audi.
Thank you very much, Pak Helmi, Pak Andre, Brian, and Ibu Renita, the distinguished speakers. I think in this afternoon we'll be having several agendas. So if you may go to the next slide, Pak Helmi. Okay, so we will be doing some deep dive on the most direct impact impacting regulations or provisions under the Omnibus Law, which is on trade, customs. We are going to also touch a little bit on special economic zones, and we will be also doing some deep diving or skimming, not deep diving, perhaps more to skim through on the overview of RCEP on what are the relevant provisions and how one can optimize the RCEP. Next slide, please. Now, okay. Now, as you may be aware, and as also perhaps shared by Pak Andri Asmoro earlier today in his presentations, basically the government is trying to develop a new scheme on business licensing, which is going to boost the ease of business and reputable business, because they are key of the development of Indonesia and the changes that is being proposed by the current government of Republic of Indonesia. If you can see on the news that there are meetings conducted strategic meetings conducted by the Ministry of Industries to push and boost the export through small medium enterprise, and as well as the specific action plans that is going to be implemented by the Ministry of Trade to boost the economic after the pandemic, or in this 2021 after the issuance of Omnibus Law, through specific industries such as automotive, electronics, pharmacy, food, and beverages. So it is important for us to be able to understand not only from a trade perspective, but also from other perspectives such as the industry, the specific economic zones, and free ports regulations as well as have been mentioned. However, due to the time limitations, we're going to basically focus ourselves today for discussions related directly to trade development. Next slide, please, Pak Helmi. Okay, facts. This is what we have from the news, and this is a fact that Indonesia is going to surplus of exports in the 2021 for January and February since 2017. I think this is in line with that have been discussed earlier as well. It is a good sign. It is a good sign, particularly because of the two reasons. Number one, that the economic are starting to bounce back again. Number two is basically perhaps is probably directed to the implementations of Omnibus Law, which, however, that the Omnibus Law consists, including perhaps its implementing regulations, consists of like almost 2,000 pages long of regulations. It will take time for all of these regulations to be implemented. For example, the new priority list that will only going to be fully implemented, hopefully by mid of 2021, which we are going to discuss again, in later in other slides. Next slide, please, Pak Helmi. Now, we will be talking about the government regulations on trade, or GR29. Right. GR29 emphasizes following provisions under the Omnibus Law. So they are in the implementing regulations that any of the implementing regulations that is currently valid will still be valid as long as they do not contravene with the provisions of the Omnibus Law. It prioritizes the micro, small, medium enterprises in trading activities. The required supply chain under the existing regulations, and of course, facilities given the improvement and development of exported innovative national products. The government regulation 29 also regulates few new stuff or few new items with regard to modern stores, and as well as the licensing for the warehousing. Actually, these are two significant changes under the Omnibus Law or under GR19. Next slide, Pak Helmi. Okay. There are, however, what I would like to share with you is that Indonesia, in a way, is a civil law country. Yeah, civil law country, which is different jurisdictions, if you compare to what we call is common law countries. Civil law countries means that most of the regulations were issued in basically on a principle base, and there will be further implementing regulations. In the absence of basically in current absence of the implementing regulations, there are several items that need to be confirmed whether it's going to be further implemented or whether or not it's going to be implemented. The first one is basically with regard to discussions on the supply chain, on whether distributor and retailer can be under the same company, as this policy is now implemented by the online single submission of ISS. Okay, the GR only provides the same concept existing regulations that a producer, distributor, and wholesaler are prohibited to distribute goods in retail to consumer, which is basically that's a common understanding, and basically we need to be able to further understand on these restrictions, because in the old days, most of this is under Indonesian company. One company can hold a double license as a distributor and also as a retailer. Okay, now even so, under the current regulations and provisions, And also in implementing regulations, distributor and retailer cannot be under the same company. So if you have two companies in Indonesia, which basically a distributor and retailer, they need to be in separate one. The issue directly resulting from that is that additional value-added taxes or tax implications, where there will be movement of goods from the distributor to a retailer, which prolong basically the supply chain in Indonesia. Another thing that is going to be a further discussions is in relation to a list of goods that require special attention when imported or exported. There are a few items being mentioned in the law, which includes prohibition of certain goods, restrictions of certain goods, and other goods that must fulfill certain requirements or go through some examinations to be able to be imported in Indonesia. So even though this is, we know that will be further regulated. Why? The reason is that because currently Indonesia have several regulations which require certain goods to be fully registered or certified before it's becoming importations to be imported to Indonesia. Now, I think another item that is worth to mention is in relations to temporary import. If ladies and gentlemen, if you probably aware that when you going to basically establish a company or manufacturing or doing constructions in Indonesia, you will be importing, for example, let's say, for example, you'll be using, not importing, you'll be using, for example, heavy machinery. Now, that heavy machinery can be imported to Indonesia in certain limited of time, which we call as a temporary import. And within that, and after that, within certain time, it's going to be re-exported back to Indonesia. Now, the Omnibus Law and the GR29 has revoked the provisions on temporary import. Now, this will remain to be seen on how the customs office in this matter under the Ministry of Finance will have a say or going to implement these regulations. Next slide, Pak Helmi. Okay. Now, several key points that is worth to mention under the new laws are definition on consumers. There are export-import policy and controls. I think same with Pak Andre as well, the completeness of Indonesian labels, distributions, trading means, the development of import, and we're going to a little bit discussing about new concept of sanctions, where previously there is basically only limited of sanctions, and there is no administrative sanctions. Well, there are administrative sanctions, but not heavily regulated, not unlike under this GR29. Next slide, Pak Helmi. All right. Some of the key updates. Definition of consumer. Why this is important? Because there was no definition of consumer before, even under the trade law. There is only one definition of consumer, which is under the anti-monopoly law, which basically almost have the same definition, that it is an individual that uses goods or services that are available in the community for its own benefit or family, and not to be traded. So definition of consumer in this law is basically end consumer, us as individuals. Another key updates is with regard to Indonesian labeling. What we have a new concept which is called as a packagers or pengemas, which is not being mentioned in existing labeling regulations. So we're going to expect a new labeling requirement. As you may be aware, some of the goods being distributed in Indonesia must have certain labelings before they are being distributed for imported and for locally sourced products as well. Then again, and similar to and one thing that is worth to mention, that currently the coordinating minister of economic affairs will have a focal point of in deciding on whether certain decisions or basically implementing certain regulations or have a quite major stake in the implementing regulations of the trade laws and as well as and other laws as well. Next slide, please. Now, distribution of goods, the things that are currently being discussed amongst the direct selling companies, though some of this is related to direct selling companies. The first point is a mandatory obligations with regard to direct selling companies. We call it usually MLM, yeah, but our friends would like to be known as more direct sellers rather than MLMs because of the previous stigma that sticks to that term. Now companies are required to grant commission on bonus on the basis of the result of sales carried out by the direct sellers and network, and currently it is made clear under the regulations that that the direct selling companies cannot be done through online marketplace. Now, as you may be aware, one of the important focus or one of the focus of the industry 4.0 is basically on e-commerce industry, right? And the government is pushing hard and support that as well. However, because of these regulations, the direct selling company could not basically use the marketplace or the platforms. It creates basically a situation where direct selling companies and marketplace in this matter would need to check on basically from day-to-day activities in the websites of the marketplace, whether there is an e-commerce, whether there is a direct selling companies to goods or products that are going to be sold or being sold at the e-commerce platform. In practice, that what we know is that some multi-level companies or some direct selling companies have been sending letters and requesting to take down several stores, online stores in basically in e-marketplace, in e-commerce sites, to basically not to sell any direct selling products. This also can be additional administrative work for the e-commerce company to be able to implement and to support this regulation. Several prohibitions that are being noticed and as well as need to be highlighted in direct selling companies is basically acquisitions of profit through a membership fee or registration fee. The reason is basically when you do the trading in Indonesia, it's supposed to be focusing on the trading itself rather than you are making money from fees from your members. Yeah, this has been an issue that we know of because some of the direct selling companies basically do have, and this provision and basically this practice is a global practice and is a global policy where direct selling companies basically have annual registrations. Yeah, during their annual registrations, they need to pay certain registrations fee to be able to do the activities as a direct selling companies or direct selling distributors. We know that some of those direct selling companies have a quite high have a quite high price or fees with regard to becoming a membership fee, but then again, as I mentioned before, there is basically a question that this is this is globally implemented, which is implemented across the jurisdictions, compares to the policy that is being implemented by the government of Indonesia. So we will be seeing basically further discussions on how it's going to be implemented. How it's going to be implemented. There is also a provision for a retailer to conduct import of goods. So if you are basically a company, a trading company in Indonesia, or any company that if you have any trading arms, you may want to check your licenses, whether you are equipped to import goods to Indonesia. And under these regulations, another thing that is worth to mention is that this government regulation allow micro and SME producer to sell goods to consumer, in this matter, end consumer, without distributor or agent in its supply chain. For foreign investment companies in Indonesia, you cannot sell directly to end consumers, right? So basically, what you need to do is to appoint a local distributor, and that local distributor then sells to basically to retailers, and retailers then sells to the end consumers. This GR29 provides support, right? Provides support to small medium enterprises or online, let's say online tradings, to be able to directly sell the goods to consumers without agents or a distributor in its supply chains. Next slide, please. Oh, as you can see, there are a lot of informations that we have in these presentations. But notably, things that we would like to discuss is that in relation to the modern store. Trading means in relation to modern stores. Now the government regulations have options for domestic investors to have a standalone department store or a store that is integrated with a shopping center that has a business license or other building on area, while foreign investor can only have a department store that is integrated in a shopping center that has a business license. So there is a differentiations between domestic investor and foreign investor who owns a department store. Okay. For exemption of self-service store, there is also regulated under this regulations, which needs to be integrated with the shopping center and not comply the facilities requirement as a self-service store. Okay. Changes under these regulations is also in relation to the sales area for a wholesaler, which must be in a minimum of 2,000 square meter or a minimum of 1,000 square meter for a cooperative wholesaler. This will be interesting on how to be implemented. It's because it aims to boost the local SMEs and local and domestic investors as well. One thing that is very interesting in this regulation is that we know that the government of Republic Indonesia have the Industry 4.0, and then they are also very, very supportive in basically promoting the export of Indonesia, right? And the central government now has the authority to determine the commodities and targeted markets for prioritas export. Yeah, but the key stakeholder in this is the Ministry of Trade. So there will be a list of goods that are going to be exported to Indonesia that will be prioritized, and those prioritizations will need to be a joint, basically, cooperations with the Ministry of Trade through a coordination meeting with other stakeholders. The law also provides not only the central government has a strong, has a basically the big authority to implement the regulations, but they also comes with the obligations. One of the obligations that is worth to mention is basically with regard to export, central government must support the development of export by providing fiscal incentive or non-fiscal incentive, information on market opportunities, technical guidance, financing, guarantee, and export insurance determined by financial institutions. So we will be seeing, this will be an interesting next couple of months to see what are the governing regulations that are being issued by the Ministry of Trade in this matter. Yeah. The next one that is very important to basically being discussed is with regard to the sanctions. Now, previously, administrative sanctions are not that highly regulated. And even if it's regulated, it is under the level of the ministry, but the ministerial decree, meaning, right? Currently, it is under the government regulation decree. Yeah. The new and most advanced sanctions mechanism under this GR is basically that administrative sanctions can be done in sequence or not in sequence. Okay, put it into perspective. If you in breach of certain regulations, or you have a certain wrongdoings in conducting your day-to-day activities, there will be administrative sanctions starting from warning letters, and then 2 times warning letters, and then you will have a after warning letters, you will have a suspension of business and temporary suspension of license, and up until revocations of business license. Now, this GR provides that under certain circumstances, it can be a direct revocations of license. So there is no warning. Basically, there is no warning. There is no more basically certain limitation of business suspension or temporary cease of license. It can be indirect revocation of license for certain activities. Okay, as you can see from our presentation on the last bullet points, if your license is revoked, you can only reapply that after 5 years. So you are blacklisted for 5 years of doing business in Indonesia if your business are basically being revoked. So that is quite a massive blow and quite a strict requirement under this new regime. As analogy, if you may be aware, if you are basically, for example, participating in a procurement, government procurement, let's say, and then or probably not government procurement, let's say from state-owned companies, government for procurement for state-owned companies. When you breach the regulations, or basically if you breach the agreements or you conduct default, then you will be blacklisted maximum around 2 years. So after the next 2 years, you can do the tender again, the bidding against with those companies, the BUMNs, with the state-owned companies. But under these regulations, you can only reapply for the next 5 years. So it's a quite tough. The reason why, because the government gives you leniency, gives you easiness of doing business, gives you a lot of incentive, but in return, you need to be compliant. So compliance will be the key in industry, trade, economic zones, and forestry, or any basically any type of jurisdictions of any types of activities. Okay. Government also along with the issuance of this implementing regulations, We have also basically what we called as the priority list. When we said about ease doing business, opening up, there is what we called as a priority list, which we're going to be further discussed by my colleague Audi. Over to you, Audi.
Okay, so thank you, Mas Riza. Yes, this slide. Thank you, Mas Helmi, for the slides. So we are now moving to the discussion with regard to the President Regulation number 10 of 2021 on investment business lines, or what we call by the priority list. This priority list is becoming one of the implementing regulation of the Omnibus Law, which was effective as of 4 March 2021. As we may be aware that this priority list replaces our current negative list, which was regulated under the President Regulation number 76 of 2007 and President Regulation number 44. And this also represent a major development in the opening up of our economy to foreign investment. So again, the issuance of the priority list is the big step forward from our government. Why? This is because our priority list is basically adopting the same concept as the negative list, that all business lines are open for foreign investment. But there is an exception for this, which are determined or closed or conditionally open for foreign investment. And the key change introduced by our priority list is a significant reduction in the number of business lines that remain subject to foreign investment limitation. And some of those, they are removed from the negative list, including business lines that have been subject to foreign investment limited since the negative list was first introduced. And then again, this new priority list will be one of the major changes, because if you have read the priority list as well as the changes, if you have the opportunity to compare between the previous and the current regime, there are big changes with regard to the foreign restriction. Next slide, Mas Helmi. Okay, so with regard to the changes, the first one is there are several areas that have significant changes with regard to the priority list. The first one is the technology, media, and telecommunication. As an example, there is this web portal and or digital platform business license that was open 100% for foreign investment with specific criteria, namely if the investment exceeds 100 billion. Otherwise, they will be capped at 49% of foreign investment. But under under our current priority list, it's all open 100% for foreign without any specific area. Certain business lines under the priority list also they change from 76% to 100%, such as telecommunication network and service activities, which includes telecommunication activities with or without cable, satellite communication activities, premium call services, premium SMS content service, and other media service. And for retail via media, which was closed, that was even closed for foreign investment, and now it's open up to 100% for foreign investment. That's from the technology area. And we also have change on the healthcare industry, where for hospitals, there was 67 foreign investment or capped at 70% for ASEAN investor. Now it's open 100% again for foreign investment. again, this as previously mentioned or discussed by my colleague Mas Riza, the purpose is basically to ease the investor to invest in Indonesia, so that would also boost our economic growth. And I think, but again, the implementation of this priority list still remain to be seen, as based on our discussion with the relevant authorities. Although this is already effective, but they are currently discussing about the implementation, including the system itself under the OSS regime. So there will be another discussion with regard to the implementation itself of our priority list. But we think that for now, priority list has made a significant and magnificent changes with regard to the investment in Indonesia. And for the next discussion, we are going to talk about our recent customs highlights and policy under the Omnibus Law, which will be presented again by my colleague Riza, Mas Riza. So over to you, Mas Riza.
Thank you, Audi. So for the next slides, all right, let me see. Okay. Interestingly, under this GR implementing regulation, there is a new authority being given to the Ministry of Trade, which is basically determining importer exporter with good reputation. This is very interesting because before this regulation, usually the profile of importer and exporters is within the sole authority of the Indonesian Customs Office, where basically under that profile they can determine the risk risk profiling of certain importer of exporter, and the lower the risk, and then it becomes more and more better for that importer or exporter. We don't know yet how this will be implemented, or whether it's going to be only related to licenses issued by the Ministry of Trade and not going to touch those being handled by the Customs Office. But then again, this will be very interesting to see on how this policy is going to be implemented. We know that there will be further regulations on verification of technical examinations, yeah, and so there will be new implementing regulations, and currently we will be waiting for that as well. Another item that is very interested to see is in relations to discussions of less use of goods that may be imported. Now, basically for your information, goods that are imported in Indonesia must be in new condition. That's the main principle. There is no further explanations on what is meant by new conditions. But what we do know, as far as we are aware, new conditions means brand new. It has not been used before, and it is not remanufactured or reconditioned goods, except if they are specifically exempted. Yeah. So, for example, if you have a basically you have a business of, let's say, compressors. Yeah. If you have business of compressor, buying a new compressor may be expensive, particularly if those used for industrial compressors, right? Instead of buying a new one, you can buy basically an alternative, which is what we call as remanufactured or reconditioned. They have the same warranty,
they have the same warranty as basically as a new goods, but then again, due to the absence of the definitions of new goods, unfortunately, importations of remanufactured and reconditioned goods into Indonesia is still a question. We tend to be more conventional that remanufactured or reconditioned goods is basically it's basically a used goods. Yeah, so it does not fit with the importation requirement under the GR or under government regulation. Okay. As an exporter or importer in Indonesia, you will need to fill in what we call as a import declarations or export declarations. Yeah, and those licenses now need to be stated in the import declarations, and we're going to see changes on that as well. And we also have a certain export-import policy under Article 18 of the GR 29, which provide the provisions on export and import restrictions are exempted in certain areas. For example, the bonded zones, and companies that use those imported goods mainly for the export purposes. Okay. Next slide, please. As also have been mentioned earlier, the impact in this matter, the trade regulations also cover also cover the special economic zone, where the entry of goods to a location of special economic zone, yeah, can be given a facility and conveniences in relation to postponement of exemption of import duty, exemption of excise, and non-collection of import tax. So the difference between the special economic zone and basically free trade zone is that special economic zone is specifically for certain industry and within the area within the island, not the entire island itself. For example, Batam or Karimun in this matter, for example, and basically they have their own administrator. Okay, another facilities under the special economic zone is that with regard to entry of goods to a business actor in special economic zone from other places in the territory, or what we call is basically Indonesian territory. Yeah. So for example, there is a special economic zone, let's say Batang special economic zone. It will be exempted for excise as long as there are raw materials and supporting materials for supporting of the manufacturing, and will not be collected of VAT or sales on tax of luxury of goods. Then again, because of these facilities that are given to you, you will need to be comply with the details and also administrative details as well. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. We have touched the authority of status of importer for MOT, and also discussing a little bit on Omnibus Law that does not basically touch on excise. What we want to do is basically to discuss of the recent audit trends that would probably be applicable to the current regime or regulations. The samples that we stated in our presentation is basically for customs. There will be also audit trends as well under the tax, yeah. But the focus of the government is that the trend of the audits will be for the e-commerce company or technological company that are currently being supported to grow in Indonesia. The common findings will be preferential tariff if you basically source your products from outside Indonesia, and as well as the valuations of your imported goods. That basically will give us the room to discuss about how your supply chain is taking into considerations here. With these new regulations, and as well as perhaps the implementation of the RCEP, which we are going to be discussing later soon, you may need to understand, and basically you may need to review your current structure again, your supply chain again, to be able to understand on how it's going to basically affect you, because each of the company has different structure and different supply chain. And for the next slides with regard to supply chain, I will hand over again to my colleague Audi for leading us on this discussion.
Okay, so thank you, Mas Riza, again. Okay, so we are now moving on to the discussion with regard to the framework of our current trade regime, where we have these three service line, i.e. the resilience, recovery, and renewal. There are several, there will be several stages or steps that will need to be assessed as well as to be implemented for each section with regard to the resilience, recovery, and the renewal. And the next step, Pak Helmi. Next slide, sorry. Okay, so with regard to the first steps, i.e. the resilience, this stage requires the management of the immediate crisis, where we have to do several steps in order to manage the crisis itself. For example, we can first develop the workforce strategies, as well as the strengthen our data privacy and cybersecurity. Why? This is because we are in the digital transformation, where most of activities are conducted through online, and we have to keep the confidentiality of the data, whether companies' data as well as customers' data or even personal data. And then we have also managed the contract obligation, where we have the obligation to manage whether we can conduct our ongoing obligation in our ongoing contract. We also need to assess the tax impact, liquidity solution, as well as manage our supply chain disruption and the impact of the closure itself, because the companies need to see whether they, for example, they still can do their business, or maybe they need to close due to the crisis, so that there will be no other choice other than the closing the company itself. But again, to survive, then we will move on to the next stage or section, which is the recovery, where we are under the recovery process and we need to stabilize our operation. And then, for example, there will be some of us maybe have implemented the work from office already, so that we are going back to the business as usual. And then we again try to rebuild our supply chain and restructure our contract as well as the obligation in our contracts. We also need to address the risk, renew our compliance plan, as well as accelerate again the digitalization due to we are under the digitalization transformation world. And the next will be the renewal. We need to again evolve our business, whether current business suits the operation or the implementation after our crisis itself. We also need to transform and strengthen our supply chain, optimize our real estate space, whether we need to we need to reduce our space, or even we need to larger our space. That might be one of the thing that component that companies may need to think of. And then we also again need to plan for the digitalization, where most of activities can be conducted online, as well as strengthen our infrastructure and transform our business model. And next slide, please, Mas Helmi. Yeah, sorry, okay. For the next slide is the supply chain 3R service line. This is the slides where we spot specific issue with regard to each service line. For example, in managing contract obligation, what we have to do, again, we have to first, for example, contractual relief provision, whether we see there is any clause that we can implement, such as force majeure, as well as terminate the contract itself. And then we again have to assess our supplier, our dispute, and our workforce strategy for the resilience. And for the recovery itself, we again need to manage and assess our strategy risk, supplier selection, as well as contract negotiation, where we need to again assess or reassess our supplier, whether they still fulfill or meet our expectation and conduct their obligation. And then usually companies might also need to conduct the restructuring. Restructuring here means the strategic restructuring, such as we can say that to change the suppliers, or again to maybe some companies need to reselect their supplier. And then one of the key points that we are talking about under our current regime is again the digitalization, where we can now do the everything online. For example, the e-commerce itself, as most of us now are familiar with the transaction in the electronic commerce, and we know that our government currently puts their special attention to the e-commerce industry. And then the last one is with regard to the evolving our business model, whether we need to larger or we need to expand our supply chain management, or even we need to cut off our supply chain the diversification. And we have to strengthen our sustainability so that we can strengthen our strategy with regard to the activities of the companies. So that's from the 3R service line. And for the next issue with regard to the RCEP will be discussed by my colleague, Mas Riza. Again, over to you, Mas Riza, and thank you.
Thanks, Audi. I think this service line, the 3R service line, is quite important in any way that you will need to basically how to react to the changes and everything. There will be parallel changes. Number one is with regard to the implementation of the Omnibus Law and its governing regulations, implementing regulations, and number two in relations to basically RCEP. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Now, these are basically the structure of RCEP. Yeah. As you can see, this is how the RCEP is structured. As with other free trade agreements, RCEP focuses itself heavily on trade in goods. There are trade in goods, they are talking about rules of origin, customs procedures, sanitary procedures, trade remedies, and standard assessment procedures. However, what is important and very interesting under the RCEP is that they are also discussing on trade on services, where there are commitments of market access, shareholding requirements, for example, movement of persons, and investment, and discussion on investment. On business environment, they are talking about intellectual property, e-commerce, which is very relevant for today's discussions, competition law, small medium enterprise, and additionals. Okay, now next slide, please. This is additional information with regard to the regional comprehensive economic agreements. Until today, basically have not yet been ratified, and we will be waiting for the ratifications of the RCEP by at least 6 members of ASEAN and 3 non-ASEAN members. Next slide, please. Now, what does this mean to business? It provides overseas expansion opportunities, as you can see, that you will have a better access to new investment markets, and expanding to your operations, and of course, fully optimizations of supply chain under the rules of origin. For informations, there are regulations on most favored nations where automatically a company or a country will receive benefits of any liberalizations conducted by one of RCEP members, and they need to provide it to other as well. For example, if Indonesia gives not related not related RCEP countries a certain of leniency, then Indonesia needs to have basically provide the same with other RCEP countries. Now, new preferential markets, it is access and increase competitiveness in new preferential markets to benefit exporters, elimination of restrictions and discriminatory measures such as regulatory requirements and trade and services. And the other is to improve business environment. Next slide, please. Come with the potential of opportunities, of course, there's a potential risk. There will be changes on regulatory changes, as I mentioned earlier today. So you will expect issuance of new regulations for this RCEP. Challenges how to comply with these regulations is also a discussion that was worth to consider. Transparency gaps and issues. We have an issue on timing of ratifications by different countries. So one country can be ready. Basically, more developed country can be ready other than other countries, and business may expect short-term transition, treating industries issues during initial stage of implementations. For your information, RCEP is meant to be fully implemented in 20 years. So not all of the companies can directly, basically must implement that in the first years, but they can be gradually implemented within 20 years. There will be new market players as a result of liberalizations and competitions in the market, particularly for similar goods. For your information, it will take 5 to 6 months for Japan and China to ratify this requirement. Singapore and Thailand is looking it by the end of 2021 to ratify this. Malaysia, interestingly, has not yet focused itself to basically in compliance with RCEP because they have CPTPP with other which is another FTA, huge FTA. Australia, Indonesia does have no clear timeline for this, and as well as Vietnam.
And I think we've already almost 5 minutes past the hour, so we will close today's event. I would like to say thank you to all of our speakers today. We would also like to thank you, our participants as well in the event today. We hope we addressed your concerns and that you found the content valuable for your business. Please feel free to contact us with additional questions that you might have. Again, thank you for participating in our event today, and we look forward to seeing you in our future event. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.